Today we're going to be talking about some interesting things relating to brain fog and why brain health matters now. There's some things you probably have never thought about when you have those days where it feels like you're in a fog. We'll be talking about cognitive decline, neural inflammation, and then talking about some of the metrics that really matter when it comes to brain health. We'll even talk a little bit about how cortisol and melatonin regulate this whole sleep cycle, and we'll jump into some peptides that, surprise, surprise, that help alleviate some of the issues with brain fog. Welcome, everybody, to the Health Accelerator Community. First of all, how many of you have ever experienced brain fog? And how many of you have had that, or maybe you've had some cognitive decline where you've just felt like things are slipping? I was on the phone or on a call on the Zoom with one of my clients, and I'm like, let's get your doctor involved. And he's like, oh, my doctor loves peptides and everything, but can't prescribe it. And he'd love to meet you. And I said, I'd love to meet him. What's his name? And he couldn't remember. And he was like, there it is. That's the cognitive decline. And so it really makes a difference because you can actually see it in your brain matter. And I'm going to, for those of you who listen to this later, I'll share it with you. But, Linda Lewis, 1847. I knew it was, okay. Now that you say the date, thank you, Linda. So 1847 was the date that the Mormon pioneers showed up, Brigham Young leading the charge. And then, Bill, you're experiencing some brain fog now. Bill, is it just because now you're listening to Regan and it's like, oh, well, good to have you guys on, and everybody else. So good to see you here. Janet, Dana, we got Tanya on. We got a bunch of you, and more coming on as we speak. So let's look at what changes happen in the brain and what does this actually mean. So if you look at the way that our brains, okay, hopefully you guys can see that. But if you look at the way our brains are developed, 25-year-old brain, nice and healthy. You got this nice hippocampus, and the hippocampus is what helps regulate the movement, the hand-eye coordination. And then you can see a typical 75-year-old, and you can see that hippocampal region has shrunk a little bit. And the brain is about the same density, but not quite as fluid as a 25-year-old. And that's, typical, no disease. But when you have mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease, you'll see a pretty dramatic shrinkage in the hippocampus. And that's one of the things that goes, when you start dropping things and you feel clumsy and your balance is off, it's a real risk when it comes to brain health. And then you can see a 75-year-old who does have dementia due to Alzheimer's disease. You can see that there's that gray matter and that fatty material that protects the brain. It's just completely withered. It almost looks like it's like dehydration. It's like a muscle that gets dehydrated. The brain gets dehydrated, and you lose that ability to have the cognition that you want. And so what drives this, there's chronic stress, inflammation, but we're going to jump into a lot of that today. But here's what happens with cognitive aging. And here's why it's so important, because our brain is that organ system that we want to take with us into our bigger, better future. But what happens is we have these subtle things that start triggering neural inflammation. And when I say the word neural, it just simply means the neurons, and your brain is part of your whole neural network. And when you have neural inflammation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial decline, this is when our brains start to lose plasticity. And plasticity is our brain's ability to heal itself. And so if you look at your brain like you would a muscle, when you work out a muscle, the muscle starts getting torn down. And then you go to sleep at night, and you get rebuilding and a remodeling of the muscle, and that tissue shows up stronger, the next few days. If you keep pushing your muscle, if you're working on the same pathway every day, let's say you do bench press and you're like, cool, I could bench 200 pounds today. I'm going to do it again tomorrow and do it again the next day. Well, you're going to have diminishing returns because your body doesn't get the chance to rebuild the muscle structure the way that you want it. And it's no different in our brain. One of the reasons why we sleep is because it allows our brains to detoxify, and it's called lymphatic circulation. And so as long as you have good air movement where you're sleeping, so you're not getting all the carbon dioxide built up around you, as long as you are exercising so you can move that lymphatic circulation, moving your body, then your brain can recover and it organizes all the thoughts. But I don't know if you've ever pulled an all-nighter. I've done that a few times in my school. And what I found is I was able to do fine on the test the next day, but I didn't remember hardly anything because I didn't actually learn it. I was just memorizing it, but I didn't get that encoding because when you go to sleep at night, what your brain does is it takes information that you've learned from the day, it encodes the most valuable information in through the hippocampus, and that hippocampal region, I showed it in this last slide. You can see that hippocampus area. That is where the encoding happens, and then that encoding gets transported into our prefrontal cortex, and now it's in your hard drive. And the useless information, the things that aren't relevant, the things that aren't important, the way that our brain conserves energy is it just discards those things. So it gets rid of it. So just like your computer, it sends it in the trash and it's gone. Sometimes you can recall it based on association, but that's, it's a little different strategy there. But brain plasticity is what we've learned over the years is that your brain, just like a muscle, can heal. And even if you've had lots of stress, all-nighters. I talked to a client today and she'd had, works for a big tech company. And, she was working from 4 a.m. until about 7 or 8 p.m. sitting in the same desk, barely had time to get up. And it really took a toll on her brain. And it wasn't just the cognitive aspect. She became less sharp, less creative, harder for her to do math equations, harder for her to do anything. And it also had a massive impact on her health. I mean, she gained about 100 pounds during that time. But the cognitive decline was there because she was so stressed. And so in the study, this was published in JAMA, the JAMA network, and this age-related cognitive decline, what they found is that the brain matter changes as you have cognitive aging. And that doesn't have to happen. There's people who are 100 years old who die and they've done brain biopsies and it looks like a 25-year-old brain. So let's talk about brain fog. This is one of the first symptoms that can show up. And there's a study that was published in the frontiers.org journals. And what they looked at is they looked at neuroinflammation and cognitive impairment. And they kind of identified what brain fog is. And brain fog can show up if you've had a chronic illness. Post-COVID can be one of those. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but allergies can induce a lot of inflammation, and allergies can give you very severe brain fog. And a lot of people think, oh, I've got cognitive decline or there's something wrong. And really, it's just you're eating foods that are causing a lot of allergies, or one of the most common things that causes brain fog are mycotoxins. So you live in a moldy environment, and until you get rid of that mold, you're going to have a really hard time processing information. And these interferences lead to poor sleep. Even if you think you sleep great, this is where I love trackers. So use an Oura Ring. I like the Garmin. You can use Apple Watch, Whoop, Sleep 8. These are all great things. But if you're not getting poor sleep and you have different toxic accumulations, even heavy metals can cause brain fog, that triggers neural inflammation. And that's what leads to cognitive decline. And some of the first symptoms you want to look for is brain fog. And so some of the early signs of memory loss, forgetting names, appointments, conversations, you're going to have a hard time multitasking and focusing. You'll misplace items. You'll, even things change socially. And I've noticed this in people I'm close to, or even, family members, where I'm like, things have changed socially. They're not as jovial as they were. They seem a little bit confused often. And so the first thing you want to check is your hearing. Because the hearing, if that goes out, you will have cognitive decline much faster. So don't hesitate in getting your ears checked and wear some hearing aids. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you do, there's also glasses. There's these sunglasses you can use that help you read lips. And they draw in the voice of the person you're looking at selectively so that you can download the hearing. And I believe here's memory loss. Now, I can't remember the name of the company that makes those, but these are going to be a big breakthrough. And we actually purchased some for my father-in-law, and I want to see if he's used them yet. I don't know if he's actually got got them yet, but you'll notice that there's going to be changes in your speech, in your writing. You'll be struggling to know how to spell things. And I don't know if that change of knowing how to spell things is due to the spell correction on our computers and phones. But this is where writing in your journal frequently is actually a really important way to test your cognitive capabilities. You can have altered judgment, misplacing items, and this is where you walk into the room, you're like, what did I come in here for? So those small things, and you'll also notice that you get more anxious and irritable. And so look for these small symptoms because they can be a big opportunity for you to look deeper. And this is where like a brain MRI, doing the neurocatch with us, the electroencephalogram or the BOSS scan. For those of you who are coming to the retreat in August, it's all going to be focused on cognitive function and cognitive performance. And so you'll get access to some early information on how to protect your brain. So there's a brain reset that you can do. So if you're ready to say, look, I don't want to even take a risk with my brain. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that I've met so many people who they said, I think my brain works okay, but we run their labs and it's like, things aren't okay, time to take action. And so just like the saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. Same thing. When's the best time to protect your brain and optimize it? Well, 20 years ago, because I can tell you, your brain gives you access to so many great things. So there's three things that we're going to focus on when it comes to this brain reset: peptides, regenerative medicine, and then we'll talk about the diagnostics. And everything's designed to restore your neurochemical balance and cellular health, but it's also personalized based on what you've got going on. So remember, this neural inflammation, this is the big driver of this cognitive decline and brain fog. And this is where you get the microglial overactivation. And what the microglia are they protect your neurons. And every neurons are like these magical cells. And if you have these microglia, they protect the neurons against damage and against threats. And if these microglia get overactivated because there's too many things coming at it, then you start to notice that there's neural inflammation. And then they start to release these harmful substances like cytokines or reactive oxygen species. And that's what leads to the nerve damage and neuroinflammation. And this is kind of the early precursors for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And where do you get the injuries to the microglia? Well, remember the EPIC? I don't know if any of you can type in EPIC. If you remember that acronym, it's the EPIC triggers. And this is where all inflammation, all chronic inflammation can come from. It can be isolated in these four compartments, but emotional stress, pain, and physical trauma. So you can have a traumatic brain injury, or you can have chronic pain. Chronic pain actually ages your brain faster than almost anything I've seen. And then you can have infections. You can get mold toxicity, which we talked about. You can have Lyme disease that impact the brain, COVID, and then you can also have the C, which are chemicals. So EPIC is emotions, pain, infections, and chemicals. So that's what's driving this process. So the very first step, get your blood work done. If you have high homocysteine, you're going to have harm to the brain tissue. You're going to have a leaky blood-brain barrier. If you have low B12, you're going to have poor cognition. If you have omega-3 imbalances, then that's going to cause some more inflammation as well. And so there's studies, this study that we referenced here, this is from the British Medical Society and their BMC Medicine, and it's called Omega-3s and Cognition. So it's really important to get the right test ran. If your liver is not functioning right, if you've got leaky gut, if you've got sleep issues, all those can show up on your blood labs. And then cortisol is the other one. If your cortisol levels are too high, that can indicate chronic stress. If it's too low, then that's almost worse, because cortisol is an anti-inflammatory hormone and it sweeps out the debris. And so this is where like ashwagandha, ginseng, cordyceps, these are great for regulating cortisol, along with a nice healthy lifestyle, which we're going to jump into. So high cortisol, you can see a shrinkage in the hippocampus, and this is typical in people who have lots of chronic stress. In fact, there's a study out of Harvard, and they found people with PTSD, they had an increase in the volume or the tissue size of the amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that's closest to the body. And so that's the reptilian brain. That's where the stress molecules come through, and the amygdala in PTSD gets enlarged, and the prefrontal cortex gets shrunk. And that impacts memory, emotional regulation. And so the best way to get out of that response is through regulating your diurnal rhythm. And that's by going to bed and waking up. So go to bed, we call it the essentials, is get to bed by 9:30 at night, wake up 5:30 a.m. And ideally that means be in bed by 9, lights dimmed, asleep by 9:30. And that will make a huge difference in your regulation of your brain and help balance the cortisol. Making sure that you're breathing at night. You can use red light therapy. These are all great things for the adrenal glands and for cortisol. Some of the peptides that you can use, once again, they're very selective. They target very specific pathways, and you can turn on genes that can regulate some of the function of the brain. And there's lots of different peptides that are being reviewed right now. One's called FG Loop or FGL. And FG Loop has been shown to be very neuroprotective. It triggers BDNF and neuroplasticity in the brains of people who have Alzheimer's disease. And so it's a nasal spray, works phenomenal. It's in phase 3 clinical trials right now. So might be something that you see as a potential treatment for Alzheimer's. Cerebrallysin is another peptide that I love, and you can do that as an IV. But cerebrallysin is one of those powerful ways to activate BDNF, to protect the brain, to detoxify it. But it also works on 3 different pathways of the brain that relate to memory. So if you are somebody who struggles with anxiety and your brain just doesn't turn off, I love Selenk, especially in mid-afternoon. I call this the Kanye West peptide. Many of you who've been to my peptide party have probably heard me talk about this because Kanye West, I'm like, instead of getting on all the benzodiazepines when he had a nervous breakdown, he could have just called me. I could have sent him some Selenk and everything would have been just fine, because what Selenk does is it activates 44 genes that are related to GABA. And GABA is what helps you be calm, relax. It reduces anxiety symptoms, helps you feel connected, and it can also improve memory, focus, and mood, and reduces your stress response and inflammation. And I love GABA because it's that thing we chase after when we drink alcohol. It's like that first drink and you get that nice warm buzz. It doesn't last long and it has diminishing returns. It's hard on the liver, hard on the blood sugar. So try Selenk instead. Next time you're like, I feel like a drink tonight. Well, try some Selenk and see if it doesn't make you feel better. And actually, one of the beautiful things that we just launched is our brand new Founders Fuel formula. And Founders Fuel is designed to activate GABA. And we do that with 3 different molecules, but we do it with kava. Kava is a GABAergic agent, and kava is one of my favorites because it's got these neurotrains in it that makes your tongue kind of numb, gives it an earthy flavor. We've got L-theanine and lion's mane in there. And when you combine that with a little bit of kratom, the pure leaf of kratom, what you're going to get is a nice focused energy. So go to foundersfuel.co and you guys can experience GABA with some dopamine and see if you don't like it. If you want to activate more focus and BDNF, CMAX is your way to go. CMAX supports memory consolidation and plasticity. In one of the studies that they found, this was in 2006, they found CMAX with cognitive effects regulates BDNF, TRK beta expression in the rat hippocampus. It increased BDNF by 40%. TRK beta activation went up 1.6 times. It worked on the exon 3 BDNF, and TRKB microRNA also increased, associated with improved conditioned avoidance behavior. So one of the studies they did on humans, they actually found that shift workers who tested they tested about 20% lower cognitively when they were working the night shift. And I think many of you have noticed that the night shift really, if you're staying up late, a couple days of that, you start having some cognitive decline. But they found by using CMAX, they were able to, the shift workers tested just as well on the test. CMAX can be used in post-stroke cognitive recovery. You do that with cerebrallysin, can be amazing. And then some of the other things that you'll notice with peptides and brain plasticity is it increases neurogenesis and synaptic repair. It modulates the immune signaling in the brain and is important for early cognitive decline. So some of the ways you can do this is you can do intranasal peptide delivery. You can do intranasal stem cells, which we've had several podcasts on that. that very safe, well tolerated. Stem cells become the hub for regeneration, and there's 261 naturally occurring peptides in there. So every 6 months to 12 months, make sure you're treating your brain. Don't risk it. It promotes neurogenesis. It reduces microglial overactivity. It restores immune imbalance. And this is from the study Mesenchymal Stem Cells for Regenerative Medicine in the central nervous system. And the reason why the nasal spray of stem cells is so important is because it allows those stem cells to get through the blood-brain barrier. Umbilical cord, now this is phenomenal because you can use exosomes. Once again, you can do it intranasally or even as an injection because the exosomes are small enough to make it through the blood-brain barrier, but these contain neurotropic factors, anti-inflammatory cytokines, and it reprograms the immune and neural pathways. And so this is all from a study called Exosomes in the Central Nervous System, a comprehensive review of emerging research and clinical frontiers. The other thing is cord plasma. So cord plasma is an East-West Health, our very own. We were looking into plasmapheresis, and I said, man, that's kind of dangerous. I had a couple patients who had adverse side effects from it. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. And what I found is a study that just found that by using concentrated umbilical cord plasma injected subcutaneously, one concentrated ml 10 weeks in a row, and they noticed that there was a lowering of tumor necrosis factor alpha, lowering of IL-1 beta, IL-6. They also found that it increased the regenerative properties. They had an activation of stem cells. This is a study where they used some of the cord plasma. You can use it in stroke with stem cells, and it can change a lot of the brain fog. So here's a patient that came to us. They had persistent brain fog. They had low B12, high cortisol, massive levels of homocysteine, high levels of homocysteine. We gave them B12 injections, omega-3s, selenium, and stem cells. And within 90 days, improved energy, improved recall, improved energy, and reduced anxiety. And so some of the things, the big things you want to do that you can't out peptide a sedentary lifestyle or poor nutrition, but one of the things that you want to do is first track your sleep. Second thing you want to do is get lots of movement in. So VO2 max training, the more you can get at least 20 minutes of active movement where you're in zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, if you can stand that at least 20 minutes a day, that is going to be better for your brain than almost anything else that I'm aware of, especially if you've got the great sleep. And then you want to reduce your EMF exposure. So making sure you don't have a bunch of phones, you don't have a TV in your bedroom, all those things are important. Make sure that you reduce the blue lights at night. So put on your blue light blockers, dim your lights. Those are all really important things. Nutrients, make sure you've got your omega-3s, your B vitamins, your magnesium, antioxidants. Those are really important. And so, as you build your protocol, I know we covered a lot in this topic tonight, but the real thing you want to do is monitor your progress. Come in and get the boss scan, see what your biological age is of your brain, and at least get a benchmark. Consider using a continuous glucose monitor. Grab your Oura ring. But the more that you can have data, the better that you can know what areas are at risk and where your threats are. And then you can also see where your improvements are coming from. So, look at it as science. The earlier we can detect things, the more we can predict your future and have better outcomes for you. And so your challenge today is to consider doing a 30-day reset, with sleep, peptides, nutrition, consider regenerative medicine, and then track your brain clarity. So start tracking today, track your sleep, track your habits, just start writing these things down because your brain can heal no matter how far gone it may feel. It's impressive to see the results you can make. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I think the brain is incredibly helpful, but any questions that anyone has on that, or how many of you are ready to start, diving into the brain health, track some things? Awesome. And for those of you who have the day off tomorrow, those of you who live in Utah, tomorrow's a great day to start just kind of putting these things into action. Reach out to your health integrator on the team and just make sure that we've got your brain just dialed in. And if you have not registered for our retreat coming up in August, and I wish I knew the dates, but all you need to do is you can email us. You can email, probably the best would be to email Chelsea at agelessfuture.com, and we'll send you all the dates for our upcoming event. But I do appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for being part of the community. And thanks for joining me on the hack. I will see you next week. Love you guys. Thank you.